Hello, and welcome back to Read the World. My name is Derek Main, and I review translated literature. I am stuck in a little nook today. Well, because home now has to be everything to everyone. So it's the kids' classroom, the kids' playroom, the kids' life. It's my work, it's my fun time, which is this, my reading, my writing, everything. Same for my wife. So the time and the spaces that we get to fill with the things like this, or the idiosyncratic things such as translated literature, they fit into tiny little nooks, both in spaces and time. So I've never been good at shot framing, as you know, but I've kind of moved this to the corner so you're not just staring at a ceiling fan the whole time, because to me that would be distracting. Okay. Yeah, see, I move out of frame even to grab something. So today we are going to review Bodies of Summer by Felipe Castagnet, translated by Frances Riddle, and this is Dalkey Archive. So this is a very thin volume, as you can see. Beautiful little book, about 100 pages in a small volume. And first I want to talk about how I came to find this, because it wasn't something that was on my radar. Somebody who I really like following on Twitter and started doing a podcast, I think, during quarantine, is a writer, Fernando Strigati. And excuse me if I have his last name terribly wrong. SDR is a tough first three letters. So he is a writer that actually just came out on Influx Press, which is out of England, a new collection of short story jolts, which I'm going to put right here, hopefully, because I think the cover is really beautiful and I'm actually really excited to read it. Well, he also runs Minor Literature site, journal, a literary journal I like a lot. And anyway, he did so I'm going to link to his stuff in the description stuff. But anyway, he did a thing about like his favorite. He's an Argentinian writer who writes now in English, and he lives in London. And he did this thing on like his favorite short novels, and I think they were all Latin American short novels. And it's actually what got me to reread The Invention of Morel, which I did my last video on. And then the other one, this one I had never heard of, which was Bodies of Summer, and fairly new. I mean, this writer, Felipe Castagnet, was born in Argentina in 1986. 4 years younger than me, a young writer. And this came out in 2017, so fairly new, but I hadn't heard of it, and I was really glad to see, him put something, Fernando Strigati, that is, this kind of fresh in my face. But I put something on Twitter that was like, hey, has anybody heard this? And surprisingly, a number have. So again, this might be another one that I have just kind of had passed me by, because there is so much. So, brief summary. This book is really weird. I'd call it like speculative fiction, some science fiction for sure. The bodies is a critical part of the story. Basically what happens is now we're in the future, and now when you die, you can go into the web in flotation, your consciousness, and then you'll be uploaded there, and then you can, if you choose to, inhabit another body. It's expensive, and of course, like the type of body you get, it goes up or whatever. Mine would be fairly cheap. Who would be expensive? Ryan Gosling's body, for instance, would be very expensive. So you get the idea. And so within this, of course, there's going to be a lot of themes, a few things we're going to talk about today that are philosophical in nature, that always are super interesting to me. And I think that's really where the book shines, is sort of the questions that you have to ask afterwards. In general, that's the nature to me of books that are this short, 100-page novella, whatever you want to call it. It's interesting that I'm doing this back to back, right, with The Invention of Morel, which is a much older Latin American text that is also science fiction based, in a sense, but that is also used as a mode, the science fiction, to discuss a very philosophical, sense, I think, of connectedness, and this is going to do the same thing. And I just found that kind of interesting. And with both texts, like a lot of short novels, like the real joy is kind of, not the real joy, but one of the joys, right, is afterwards when you're kind of poring over it in your head. Like you want to sit out on the front porch and talk to somebody about it. That's like the vibe you get from those short novels. When I'm reviewing massive behemoths, you almost want to break it up, right? But like no one wants to watch like 45 minutes of me, you know, going over a 500-page book. So like Blood Dark by Louis Guillot, for instance, that I reviewed recently. I mean, you can really only get a little bit of a taste of it in a review, and the idea is kind of like, okay, so you might like it or you might not. But with these, I feel like you get more of a chance to just kind of ramble, and then my reviews end up becoming less about the text and the work and more about the ideas the work presents. And that's why I like short novels, because that's what it can do. Now, another aspect, because this is science fiction, speculative, whatnot, like, you can't give away the plot, you know? Like, I mean, you really can't review it past a certain point plot-wise, so it makes sense also to focus on the ideas it brings up and not necessarily like how we get from point A to point B. And in my opinion, if there is a weakness to this book, which I think there is one kind of weakness, it's that anyway, which is the narrative thing. And the narrative is, it's very linear and it follows a very, I want to say almost traditional story, because it is, for it to be so speculative and sort of imaginatively experimental when it comes to the elements of the future that are imagined, the actual narrative is a fairly straightforward revenge type narrative. And that, along with the way the book ends, and by that I mean just sort of the last 3 pages and the last sort of thing that happens, are the 2 parts of the book that were not my favorite. So the strength of the book to me is in the idea behind it, sort of the idea behind the flotation and choosing to go into these bodies and dealing with themes of death and the body-soul problem, and of course the technological aspects. And the writing is tremendous. Of course, the translation as well from Frances Riddle. That's the only way I can read it. But a little bit of the weakness there falls to me in the narrative. The story that we're running out throughout that threads it, and then this sort of end piece, like they take me out of it just a little bit, because they are a little more cinematic, traditional in flavor than experimental, and that's just a personal preference. Okay, so the themes, I'm going to focus just on 2 that really struck me. The first is in body horror, the horror of having a body, of being in a body. And it really comes to light very strongly when it is not your original body and you are trying to figure out how to move in it. Some of the best aspects of the writing is, this was someone who was a male and now is in a female's body. And it's really not sexualized, or even gender is not the most sort of important thing. What it feels like as you're reading it is almost like a sumo suit. Like your consciousness has been put in this thing, and you can see that like in the writing it's hard for him, and it's still him, you identify that way, so I think that's fair, but it's hard for him to like walk and like figure out where to put his hands, and it's just like interesting, right? And you get this sort of body dysmorphia and this like, you know, you're very detached from it since it's something that's like purchased for you, and those parts really grossed me out in kind of a fascinating way, and were interesting to think about. And then the other major theme, which is technologically assisted by the way that this can now happen in this reality that Castagnet has created, the other major thing, of course, is the nature of consciousness and that body-soul problem. Because it is essentially solved here in that the body is, it can be anything, and you can get a new one, and that's no big deal. I mean, there are some really interesting scenes, because death takes on a new meaning, right? Because it's not an end anymore. So, I don't know really what to compare it with without giving away too much, but I mean, it's almost just like a naughty thing to do, like kind of thing, you know, because you can just like then go into flotation and then come back however you like. But within that, it's interesting, it's called Bodies of Summer, right? And I start with the body horror, but like the nature of consciousness is the next thing. But within that, you realize that what we interact with on a day-to-day basis are other bodies. And that's kind of clear in this, as he, in the first body incarnation, and there will be more than one, tries to interact with the world. Like, you know, of course we're getting the inner life and we're getting that narrative and that inner dialogue, but he is even in a world that understands that bodies are sort of these temporary things, he is still a body to the world, and that is how he has to like move about and experience the world and be experienced by the world, particularly by other people, you know? And I thought that was interesting. So we've got it where the body takes on less of an importance, but yet it's still not separated out from the socialization aspects. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, because you can't like just sit here and me take my consciousness and my thoughts and just boop and like hand them to you. Like, you have to interact with me as a body if we were in real space. And in this space right now, you have to interact with me as like a visual image, like what I decided to wear today and the state of my beard, and my friends like screen printing next to me, along with like probably a cover of a book I'm talking about, and then the words as they come out, right? Like, that's how you're interacting with me. See, you're interacting with a visual and an audio here in this sense, but it's still not my consciousness. Like, it's still something curated. It's still choices that I have kind of made to present in a certain way, and in some ways lazy choices because I didn't care to make choices, right? It sort of depends, and you get to get a sense of maybe what that person thinks is important or not important, but it's still your conjecture and projection because you can't, again, I can't hand you this. The body's different though, right? And even in this world, again, where they understand, like everyone understands the body is temporary, it still seems to have this permanent idea in our head where when we see a body, we make judgments and we decide this is how this person is. This is how this person lives. This is how this person behaves. And these are the ethics of this person. This is what's important to this person. Even when it's a body that's purchased. It's not even theirs. And so I find that really interesting that you couldn't disassociate the idea of the body as a representation of a consciousness from the social sphere, even though completely, totally disassociated personally, and everyone does understand that. Okay, so I think I've got all that. Yeah, I think I got that. So we're going to do 3 sections. I'm looking down at my notes. Page 8 I'm going to do because it's a good little example of the writing. It kind of sets up how the speculative fiction works. And it also, you know how I said, like, it gives you more things to think about when you have a novel this short. Well, one of the interesting things is how the dead who have chosen to have bodies interact with those still in flotation, so those still on the net. I'm pointing to a computer that you can't see, which makes no sense. But so it deals a little bit with that. But before I read that, I do want to add, I want to remember that I wanted to say, one of the most interesting aspects actually to think about later is what you might choose and why someone might choose what they did in terms of your first death. Or even your second or third, I guess, because at any point you could say, you know, unplug me from the net. That was cool, because there are some people in here who make different choices. Like, you are not forced to go into flotation and then have a new body. And of course, there are plenty of people who can't afford to too. There is there's another undercurrent going on of capitalist bent, of course. But I thought that was really interesting. Like, when you can choose to never die, why would you choose to die? And it's not as dark or morbid as like I would have expected. It's treated with a type of grace that actually makes you think about your own death in a much more pleasant way than I'm used to. Like a letting go and an acceptance that I certainly have never been able to get to. But, well, I thank Castagnet for providing a little inkling of that. All right, so page 8. I'm everywhere today, right? I'm like, bloop. It's strange to be on the outside. I look at the screen as if it were an aquarium. I used to be a fish, and now I walk again on land. I find my friends, some cousins, co-workers. Many of them died shortly after I did, but others have only been dead a matter of weeks. Some of them will eventually decide to return to a body. Others won't ever want to come back. The internet is now totally personalized but never private. Each search leaves an indelible digital mark that's as easy to trace as a footprint in the snow, visible to the living as well as the dead. When I first entered flotation, the dead were encapsulated in modules that you had to pay to access. Now they all float freely across the web. So a good example there of the writing and sort of how you're going to get some of the exposition of the really imaginative speculative fiction. And I'll just say there at the end, I think you got this, you saw when he first entered flotation, it was like this, and now it's like that. So he was one of the first, and this is an important aspect of the book, to be able to do this. And we'll get, on the third thing I read, we'll understand kind of why that's important and what it is. But he is of that first sort of generation that were able to go into flotation and not die forever. So page 46, this is my favorite section of writing in the entire thing. He is a body at this point, and he is traveling downtown to try to get a job. It's the first time I've been downtown in almost 100 years. The number means nothing to me. The taxi driver tries to chat with me, but his words fade into the urban landscape. I see buildings that aren't there anymore in my mind, like tracing superimposed over reality. I assimilate the new constructions. I've seen a lot of them in the online maps. 60 hours of new images as I snorkeled through the streets and subways in virtual reproductions that include everything, even the filth. Maps are the literature of the future. Maps and urban landscape fused into one fluid, permeable substance. Tastes change, art endures in the artifacts, an ancient water fountain, a door, a bus shelter. That's why you read it. All right, page 60. So why is it important that he was one of the first? Because there are now digital archaeologists, or anthropologists, sorry. God, my words. Digital anthropologists. And there's one in particular that meets him and is very interested in him because he was one of the first. And this is a monologue, the last thing I'm going to read, from the digital anthropologist. And it brings up stuff that could take hours and hours of video. We're going to go back to the beginning about why short novels, particularly ones with philosophical bent, can do this, and that what makes them kind of magical and stick with you. And we're not going to go into the hours and hours. Instead, I'm just going to read this and leave you with this and look at all the little threads that 4 sentences could take you in thinking about reality. Internet modified reality by turning it into an object. The web has an existence as concrete as the cities of any civilization. The present is superimposed on the past, so the regular user can only access the top layer of the web. But we know that each version created a new layer. We're most interested in what was deleted. The deleted articles of Wikipedia are more important than the ones that weren't. Why would an article have been erased from an encyclopedia that proposed to include everything? The things that were made to disappear hold the key to humanity. All right, pretty cool. All right, I hope everybody is staying safe, sane, doing as well as they can, and if you're doing, then you're doing great. Be good to folks.